Welcome to Beyond Color Stories, where real emotions bloom and every love story leaves a mark. I'm your storyteller, James, and before we begin, I want to know, where in the world are you listening to me from tonight? Wherever you are, I'm glad you're here, because this story, it begins with a black waitress and a man who had everything except peace. One rainy night, their paths crossed, not in love, not yet, but in something deeper, something unexpected. What happened next turned whispers into headlines, but don't worry. We're going to take it slow, from the very first night, and watch how kindness, heartbreak, and fate rewrite everything. So settle in, turn up the volume, and let your heart listen closely. This is Black Waitress Helps Drunk Millionaire Get Home. 4 weeks later, she's pregnant and owns his restaurant. And this is Chapter 1. The air was thick with the scent of spices and faint grease as the restaurant kitchen buzzed behind her, pots clanging, oil spitting, voices rising over each other in exhaustion and end-of-shift frustration. It had been a long night, longer than usual, and Neela Storm's feet ached inside her worn-out black sneakers. She had just clocked out, tied her long, silky straight hair into a high ponytail with her signature crimson scarf, and stepped outside the back door for a breath of cool air. The alley was quiet, dimly lit by the flickering neon sign above Velvette's, the upscale restaurant where she had served tables for the last 2 years. Her brown skin shimmered slightly under the moonlight, her breath clouding in the chilly air. She had no idea the next few minutes would change the entire course of her life. That's when she saw him. Slumped against the brick wall, half-shadowed beneath a rusty fire escape, was a man. At first, she thought he was homeless, maybe passed out from the cold or a bad night. But then she noticed the luxury shoes, Italian leather, polished, expensive, and the tailored navy coat lined with golden silk. He wasn't just anyone. His head hung forward, dark waves of chestnut hair falling over his forehead. One hand was resting loosely by his thigh, the other clutching a glass bottle that had long been emptied. She hesitated. It wasn't safe helping drunk strangers, no matter how well dressed they were, but something about him looked broken. Not dangerous, not violent, just lost. Her instincts, the same ones that had helped her raise a little brother and keep her dignity in a cruel world, kicked in. "Hey," she called softly, stepping closer. No answer. She knelt beside him, gently touching his shoulder. He groaned and slowly lifted his face, eyes unfocused but startlingly green beneath half-lowered lids. And in that brief second, even though he was clearly drunk, he looked right at her, not through her, not around her, but into her. "You all right?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm, used to calming angry guests and handling trouble without panic. He tried to speak, but all that came out was a garbled whisper. Then suddenly he slumped toward her, his body going limp. With a strength born from years of struggle, Neela caught him before his head hit the pavement. His face pressed briefly into the side of her neck, and she caught a breath of his scent. Expensive cologne, warm whiskey, and something unnamably sad. "Okay, okay. Let's get you off this ground," she murmured, looping his arm over her shoulder and heaving him upright. He was tall, easily 6'3", and though lean, he was heavy with the weight of unconsciousness and despair. She half-carried, half-guided him toward the alley exit, grunting softly with the effort. His body leaned into hers, his breath warm against her skin, his murmurs incoherent but fragile, like the whispers of a boy who hadn't felt safe in years. Just outside the alley, a sleek black car sat idling. His. The keys were in his coat pocket. She reached in cautiously, trying not to jostle him. His fingers twitched as she brushed against them, but he didn't wake fully. Once she got the door open, she managed to lower him gently into the plush leather passenger seat. She sat there for a second, catching her breath, trying to decide what to do. Call the cops? Number this man didn't look like he needed trouble. He looked like he needed rescue. So, without overthinking it, she slid into the driver's seat, adjusted it with shaking hands, and started the car. The inside was like something out of a movie. Polished wood panels, whisper-quiet engine, and the soft scent of imported leather. Her heart pounded as she merged onto the road, glancing at the address on a card she found in his wallet. Cairo de Veron, it said. The name struck something faintly familiar. Her stomach twisted. She'd heard it before, maybe in gossip whispered around the staff lounge, in passing among the elite customers. Cairo de Veron, the owner of Velvet's, the man whose empire she worked under every night, and she had just helped him out of the alley behind his own restaurant, with no entourage, no guards, no fake smile, just a soul heavy with invisible scars. The drive was quiet except for the hum of the tires and his occasional sighs. She kept stealing glances at him, wondering what kind of pain could drown a man like him in silence and whiskey. His fingers moved once, lightly brushing hers on the gear shift, and he murmured, "Tired of everyone pretending." Then he slumped again, as if those words had taken everything left in him. The gates to his estate were gold-tipped and opened the moment the car approached. She drove through a winding path lined with moonlit olive trees, arriving at a mansion that seemed to glow against the night. With effort, she pulled him out, his body heavier now. He woke briefly as she helped him up the steps. "You're not real," he whispered. "You smell like home." Nyla's chest clenched unexpectedly at those words. She didn't answer. She just unlocked the door using his thumbprint, stepped inside, and was immediately swallowed by opulence. Grand marble floors, soft golden chandeliers, walls lined with black and white photos of cities and shadows. She led him through the living room, up a wide staircase, and into a master bedroom where the sheets were crisp but untouched, like no one had slept in them for weeks. She eased him onto the bed, pulled off his shoes, and covered him with a navy blanket. He blinked up at her once, eyes glassy but filled with something raw, something broken open. "You're beautiful," he whispered, "but not just outside. Don't go yet." She placed a bottle of water and aspirin on the bedside table, her hands trembling slightly. "Sleep. You'll be okay," she said softly. And as she turned to leave, his hand reached weakly for hers, but didn't quite make it. His eyes fluttered shut. A deep sigh escaped his lips. He looked at peace, more peaceful than anyone had the right to be in a world so cold. She stood at the door for a moment longer, watching this man she didn't know. She didn't understand why her heart was beating so fast. Maybe it was the mystery of it. Maybe it was the way he had spoken, as if she were light in a room full of ghosts. She walked out quietly, her fingers brushing the wall like she was leaving behind something sacred. The door clicked shut behind her. Outside, the wind had picked up. Leaves danced across the stone path. She got back into his car, drove it carefully back to the restaurant parking lot, and left the keys in the staff office drop box, saying nothing to anyone. Her shift had ended hours ago, but something inside her felt like it was only just beginning. As she walked home under the silver sky, the words he had whispered repeated in her mind. "You smell like home." She didn't know what he meant. She didn't know what would come of tonight. But for the first time in a long time, something in her chest glowed quietly, like the very first flicker of a match. She had met a man not in power or suits or ego, but in ruin, and in his ruin she had seen something soft, something honest. Nyla didn't fall in love that night. Not yet. But something had started, something unspoken, something fated, and she didn't know it yet, but she had just shaken the life of a man who had never, ever been moved before. 4 days passed, quiet, strange days where every sound felt softer, every color slightly brighter. Neela tried to convince herself nothing had changed. She folded napkins at her usual station, carried trays with robotic grace, answered customers with her practiced warmth. But something inside her felt different, like the air had been altered since that night, since the soft closing of that mansion door behind her, since the weight of an unconscious stranger had pressed against her skin and left an imprint deeper than touch. She didn't speak about it to anyone. She hadn't told a soul what happened. It wasn't fear that kept her silent. It was something else, something sacred. By the fourth evening, exhaustion rolled down her spine like heat. She'd just set a tray of wine glasses on table 12 when she felt it. A strange stillness, like the hush before a storm. The kind that pulls your breath without warning. She looked up slowly, and the tray nearly slipped from her fingers. He was there, sitting at the farthest corner booth, angled in such a way that shadows half draped over his sculpted jaw, was Cairo de Veron, clean-shaven, hair brushed back in soft waves, wearing a tailored charcoal suit that hugged his frame like silk. But it wasn't the transformation that froze her. It was the way he looked at her, like he knew, like he remembered every breath of that night. He didn't speak, didn't wave, didn't smile widely like men often did when they flirted clumsily. He just looked, intently, like she was a song he didn't want to end. His eyes never left hers, even as she approached his table, with a menu she didn't need. Her heart slammed against her chest. The dining room around them buzzed as usual, but to her it all faded. There was no laughter, no clinking cutlery. Only him. "Table for one?" she asked softly, standing beside him. Her voice didn't sound like her own. Cairo smiled then, slow and private. "No," he replied, voice low, velvet rich. "Table for two." She blinked, confused. "Will someone be joining you?" He tilted his head. "I was hoping you would." She laughed, nerves escaping through the sound. "I'm working." He said nothing, but from the pocket of his suit jacket, he pulled out a folded piece of cream-colored paper and slid it across the table. She stared at it, heart drumming. Her fingers hesitated before picking it up. Inside, written in elegant handwriting, were 3 words: "Dinner. Just us." The note trembled in her fingers. She looked up at him, but Cairo's gaze was calm, steady, unreadable. "You left your kindness behind," he said quietly, voice almost a whisper. "I'd like to return it." Her breath caught in her throat. She was still holding a tray of glasses, still standing in a restaurant full of chatter. But somehow the floor beneath her shifted entirely. She nodded, barely, her lips parting in surprise. Then she turned and walked away, fast, trying to hide the way her hands shook. Her manager, Mr. Doyle, frowned as she approached. "You all right?" he asked. "Feeling lightheaded," she lied. "Can I clock out early tonight?" He studied her face. "You never leave early." "Just this once," she whispered. He relented. "Go. Get some rest." She didn't rest. Instead, she ran home, changed into a soft cream dress that kissed her curves and shimmered like moonlight on her smooth skin. She brushed her hair till it glowed, her fingers trembling with each stroke. Then she tied her crimson scarf over her ponytail, the same one she wore the night they met. Not for style, for remembrance. At exactly 8:30, she arrived at the rooftop garden of Velvet's Heights, a sister branch built atop a skyscraper Cairo owned, where reservations were booked months in advance. But tonight it was empty, reserved. Candlelight flickered in glass bowls floating across a still reflecting pool. The wind danced through strands of her hair as she stepped forward. He was already there, standing beneath a golden trellis woven with roses. His back was turned, but the moment her heels clicked softly on the marble, he turned. The look in his eyes nearly melted her. "You came," he said, voice warm like velvet wine. "I didn't know if I should," she replied, heart lodged in her throat. "I didn't know if you would," he answered, and then extended his hand. She walked forward, placing her hand in his. It felt right. They sat across from each other at a long table, set with silver cutlery and white lilies. Soft jazz hummed from a distance, almost like the stars themselves were playing it. They didn't speak at first. They simply watched one another, drinking in the realness of this meeting. Nyla sipped her water slowly, trying to calm the whirlwind inside her. She watched the way Cairo's eyes followed every movement she made, gentle, not possessive, curious, deliberate. "You've been quiet," she finally said, breaking the silence. "I've been listening," he answered, "trying to remember every word from the last time I saw you. I think I was dreaming then." "You weren't," she said softly. "I know that now." He leaned forward slightly. "I want to know everything about you, Nyla Storm." Her name in his voice made her skin hum. So she told him. She told him about her mother's illness, about working 2 jobs since she was 20, about raising her younger brother alone after their father left and never looked back, about nights she cried behind the freezer doors because rent was due and tips were low, and about the secret dream she never told anyone, to write stories that changed people's lives. He said nothing. He just listened, eyes never wavering, hands folded, heart open. When her voice cracked near the end, when she said, "And sometimes I feel invisible, no matter how many smiles I give," something shifted in him. He reached across the table, slowly, and took her hand in his. "You don't just serve tables," he said. "You serve warmth, and hope, and grace." Neela stared at him, unable to speak. "I've had 10 years of meaningless dinners," Cairo whispered. "This is the first one I want to last forever." She didn't pull her hand away. Instead, she turned it over and laced her fingers with his. They sat like that for a long time, the city glittering beneath them like the stars had fallen just to listen. The waiter came once, placing their plates quietly, then disappeared. Neither touched their food. They were feeding each other something else, something unspoken. Then, without warning, he brought her hand to his lips, kissed it softly, not like a man claiming a woman, but like a man who had just found a rare flower and didn't want to crush it. Her eyes fluttered. "I don't know what this is," she whispered. He nodded. "Neither do I. But I know what it's not. It's not pretend." She let the silence settle between them like silk, and then, for the first time in years, he laughed. A real, raw laugh that cracked something open in his chest. He shook his head. "I haven't laughed like that since I was a boy." Neela smiled, soft and wide. "Feels good, doesn't it?" He nodded. "Like breathing after being underwater." The night grew deeper, and the candles flickered lower. They didn't rush, didn't speak of tomorrow. Just let the magic stretch into the spaces between heartbeats. When he walked her out, he didn't ask to kiss her again. He simply pressed his forehead gently against hers and whispered, "Thank you for showing up." In more ways than one. She looked up at him, and for a moment, the world disappeared again. "Good night, Cairo," she whispered. "Good night, Nyla." And then she turned and walked into the elevator, her heart full of questions and something dangerously close to hope. She rode the elevator down from the rooftop garden with her fingers brushing lightly over her scarf, heart still echoing with the softness of Cairo's forehead pressed to hers. His laughter lingered in her ears like a song unfinished, and the scent of rose-laced candlelight still clung to her skin. But as she stepped into the rain-slicked night, the city below was soaked in silence, broken only by the occasional honk and the distant moan of thunder. The sky held a restless ache, and so did she. For hours she couldn't sleep. Her fingers hovered over her phone, unsure. But the next evening, as rain whispered against the city's windows, her phone finally buzzed with a message that pulled every breath from her chest. It wasn't long. It didn't beg. It simply said, "Dinner. Just you. Just me. Come as you are." Attached was an address, his penthouse, and a time, 8 p.m. She stared at it for a full 10 minutes before standing and walking to her closet with slow, reverent steps. She didn't choose the dress for seduction. She chose it because it made her feel alive. The red silk hugged her gently, moved like poetry against her skin, and as she brushed her hair smooth and tied the crimson scarf into it once more, she told herself this wasn't a fairy tale. But when she stepped into the cab and looked out at the world sliding by, blurred by sheets of rain, it felt like one. The building loomed into the sky like a whispered promise. She was buzzed in before she could press the button. And when the elevator reached the top, the doors opened to a hallway of quiet elegance, marble floors and soft light. The door to his penthouse was already ajar. She raised her hand to knock, but before she could, it opened slowly, and Cairo stood there. His tie was loose, the top button of his shirt undone, and for a moment neither of them said anything. The sound of rain behind her, the golden warmth behind him, it was like standing between two worlds. His eyes met hers, slowly drinking her in from head to toe, not with hunger but reverence, like a painter memorizing light. "You came," he said, but his voice cracked slightly, as if he hadn't believed she would. She stepped inside, and he closed the door behind her, like sealing a secret. No music played, no food was waiting. Just silence, candles, and the sound of water running down the windows. They didn't go straight to the table. They walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows instead, shoulder to shoulder, the world outside crashing with stormlight and fury. Lightning flashed across the city and danced on her skin. "You're soaked," he murmured, brushing a finger across her damp shoulder. She turned to him slowly, her hair sticking slightly to her neck, her breath caught in her chest. "I didn't bring an umbrella." He smiled softly, then reached up, gently tucking a wet strand behind her ear, his thumb lingering against her cheekbone. "You're a storm, too," he whispered, and the moment cracked open between them. No more words were needed. The air shifted. His hand moved from her cheek to the side of her neck, and when his lips touched hers, it wasn't polite. It wasn't soft. It was fire meeting fire, two worlds colliding with a hunger born of restraint and longing. Her arms wrapped around his neck as he pulled her tighter, the thunder outside drowning in the beating of their hearts. The kiss deepened, mouths searching, breathing each other in like salvation, and she felt his hands move along her back with reverence and urgency, like he needed to prove something to her soul. He lifted her, her legs wrapping around his waist without thought, and carried her through the penthouse like she weighed nothing but meaning. The bedroom was lit with nothing but golden candlelight and the echo of their breathing. He laid her gently on the bed, not rushed, not careless, and as he hovered above her, eyes locked with hers, his fingers traced the edges of her soaked dress, peeling it away slowly, inch by inch, like unveiling art. Her skin glowed under his touch, and when he finally kissed the space between her collarbones, she sighed his name, a sound so soft it trembled through him. "Nyla," he breathed, as if just saying her name healed something broken. She explored him too, his shoulders, his chest, the curve of his jawline, her fingers memorizing him like a prayer she never wanted to forget. Their bodies moved in rhythm, hearts racing, breaths catching, the storm outside crashing against the glass, as if echoing the intensity within. Every kiss was a promise, every touch a confession. And when they finally lay tangled in silk sheets, her head against his chest, their limbs like roots entwined, he looked at her like she was made of stardust and poems. "You don't know what you've done to me," he whispered into her hair. She blinked up at him, wide-eyed, vulnerable. "I don't know what this is, Cairo." "It's real," he said. "That's what it is." He traced small circles on her back with his fingertips, and for the first time in years, she felt weightless, like maybe she could breathe, dream, love. He kissed her forehead gently and tucked her close, as if the world would try to take her and he wouldn't let it. "Don't disappear," he said softly, almost a plea. She didn't answer, not because she didn't want to, but because her heart was too full of emotion to speak. She stayed wrapped in him for hours, listening to the storm fade into drizzle, the candlelight flickering slower. But just before dawn, she rose silently, kissed his shoulder, and slipped from the bed like a ghost. She dressed slowly, looked back once at the man who had somehow burned a mark into her without touching her soul too hard. She left a single rose from his nightstand on his pillow and walked out into the pale morning, barefoot in the hallway, heart confused but alive. The elevator doors closed softly, and as she descended into the waking world, the memory of his hands on her skin still clung to her like the scent of rain. Love was in her veins now, and yet it scared her more than it ever had before. The elevator ride down was silent, but her heart wasn't. Each beat sounded like a goodbye she hadn't planned, a farewell written not in words but in the way her body ached from the memory of his. Nyla stepped into the early dawn light, the air still soaked with leftover rain and the scent of night's secrets. Her heels dangled from her fingers as she walked barefoot to the curb, each step grounding her from the clouds she had floated on hours ago. The cab ride home was quiet, her fingers curled in her lap, tracing the places he'd kissed, as if her skin still held the echoes of him. She tried not to look at her phone, tried not to hope for a message, but every vibration that wasn't him felt like a whisper denied. At home, she laid on her bed fully clothed, staring at the ceiling, remembering the warmth of his arms and the way he'd said, "Don't disappear." But he had. He disappeared into silence that stretched like glass between them, fragile and cold. Days passed like smoke. She returned to work with her chin lifted and her eyes shadowed, hoping she could pretend nothing had changed, though everything had. She scrubbed tables, poured drinks, smiled for tips, all while carrying something no one could see. A secret fire, a memory of a night that had shaken her soul. She still wore the crimson scarf sometimes, still tied it into her hair like a ribbon of remembrance. Her friend Tasha noticed the way she drifted off mid-sentence, the way she sometimes touched her own lips like they still remembered the shape of someone else's. "Call him," Tasha said one afternoon as they folded napkins before opening shift. "Men are stupid. Sometimes they need a push." But Nyla only shook her head. "If I was more than a moment, he'd have come looking." Still, that night lived in her like a melody she couldn't stop humming, and then, 4 weeks later, her world shifted again. It began with exhaustion, the kind that clung like fog and made her legs feel like stone. Then the nausea arrived, sharp and sudden. At first, she blamed stress, blamed the long shifts and skipped meals, but deep down, a seed of knowing bloomed, terrifying and tender. She bought the test with trembling hands, wore a hoodie, and kept her head down at the pharmacy, like she was hiding from fate itself. At home, in the quiet of her tiny bathroom, she stared at the test as the color bloomed, two pink lines, clear and undeniable. Her knees buckled, and she sat on the cold floor, her palm pressed to her belly as her heart thundered with every emotion at once. Fear, shock, wonder. The realization hit her like lightning. She was pregnant, pregnant with Cairo's child. The air around her pulsed with disbelief. Her eyes welled, but no tears fell. Not yet. She looked at herself in the mirror, her reflection pale and wide-eyed, a hand resting gently where life now stirred. She whispered into the stillness, "You are already loved." And she meant it. Even if Cairo never came back, even if this was the last thread that connected them, she would raise this child with all the love the world had ever denied her. She would pour every ounce of hope, every stolen dream, into the heartbeat now growing inside her. But the fear was real too. How would she work those long shifts? How would she pay rent, afford diapers, manage doctor visits on waitress wages? The worry curled in her like a storm cloud, heavy and gray. Still, she told no one, not even Tasha. Not yet. She wanted to feel the joy first before reality stole it. She walked to work the next morning with new shoes on her feet and new resolve in her step, determined to protect what she carried. But fate met her at the door in the form of her manager's tight-lipped frown. "Nyla, come to the back," Mr. Doyle said, not meeting her eyes. She followed him, heart steady, assuming it was about the register from yesterday or the schedule. But when he handed her an envelope and avoided her gaze, something in her stomach dropped. She opened it with slow fingers and scanned the words, the bold headline slapping her first, "Termination effective immediately." No reason listed, no warning, just finality in ink. "Why?" she asked, voice low and firm. Mr. Doyle shifted uncomfortably. "You've been distracted lately. Upper management thinks it's time to let you go." "Upper management?" she echoed. "I haven't done anything wrong." "I'm sorry," he said, but there was nothing in his tone that sounded like sorrow, just bureaucracy dressed in fake concern. She walked out the back door, the same door she had once carried Cairo through, and stood in the alley where everything had started. The sky was clear, but inside, the wind howled with questions. Fired, pregnant, alone. The city felt bigger now, colder, and she felt impossibly small. She walked home in silence, not crying, just thinking, her arms wrapped around herself like armor. She didn't know where her next paycheck would come from. She didn't know how she'd explain to her brother, who depended on her, or to Tasha, who'd see straight through her silence. But she knew one thing, that no matter what, the tiny life growing inside her was not a mistake. It was a beginning, and beginnings were often disguised as endings. That night she lit a candle, sat cross-legged on the floor, and whispered to her baby again. "You're not alone," she said softly. "You have me, and I'll give you everything I never had." Outside, the wind roared through the city like it was trying to steal dreams. But inside that small apartment, there was a warmth beginning to grow, one heartbeat at a time. The air in Nyla's apartment felt too still, too hollow, like even the walls were holding their breath with her. Her fingertips grazed over her stomach, barely curved but already housing the weight of a future, and the silence that surrounded her was louder than any city noise outside her window. She stared at the flickering candle on her nightstand as if its fragile flame carried the answers she needed, but all it offered was a quiet reflection of her confusion. Her lips parted to speak, to say his name aloud, but the words died in her throat. She had given him space. She had given him time. 4 entire weeks had passed with no message, no call, no sign, not even a whisper in the wind that he still remembered her touch, her laugh, her scent soaked in rain and silk. And now she carried something irreversible, something sacred. She had his child inside her, and every heartbeat that pulsed beneath her skin reminded her of that night, the way he had looked at her like she was the last soft place left in the world, the way his hands had roamed her body like it was a language he needed to relearn. But that tenderness had been followed by absence, and his silence hurt worse than any storm ever could. She had tried to be strong. She had held her head high, walked with grace, clutched that little white stick like it was both a sword and a secret. But now she was fired, without cause, without a word, without a warning. And she knew, deep in her gut, that someone had pulled a string tied to her existence like she was a loose thread they could snip. Her world spun. Her hands trembled as she folded the letter back into its envelope and tucked it into her purse, not as a keepsake, but as evidence. She took one long breath and stared at her reflection in the mirror, eyes wide, jaw set, her scarf tied high like a crown. She wouldn't let them erase her. Not from her job, not from Cairo's life, and certainly not from the truth. Rage didn't drive her, it was clarity, ice-cold and steady, that guided her steps as she made her way across the city. The morning sun was pale, casting gold over the streets as if trying to cleanse them, but her heart pulsed with thunder. She walked into de Veron Enterprises like she belonged there, her chin lifted, her coat whipping behind her like a flag of battle. The lobby buzzed with Monday morning energy, heels clicking, phones ringing, the scent of coffee and ambition in the air. But all of it hushed the moment she stepped inside. Whispers rose like a tide. Who was she? Why was she here? But none of them mattered. The receptionist barely had time to raise a finger before Nyla was already past her, her heels tapping out a warning on polished marble. The elevator dinged, the doors opened, and when she stepped out onto the top floor, the executive level, it was as if the atmosphere itself changed. Cairo's assistant stood at her desk, wide-eyed, stammering something about appointments. But Nyla didn't stop. She placed her hand on the double doors of his office, pushed them open without knocking, and walked in like a storm ready to wreck everything in her path. Cairo sat behind his massive desk, his back straight, head tilted over paperwork, unaware that his entire past and future had just entered the room. The moment he looked up, his pen dropped. His mouth parted slightly. For a heartbeat, he didn't move. Couldn't. She stood in the doorway like something out of a dream, strong, radiant, eyes glassy with fury and grief, and something even deeper than love. "Nyla," he said, barely a whisper. She didn't return his softness. "You fired me," she said, her voice a sharp, trembling melody. "And I'm pregnant." The words fell between them like stones into a still pond, rippling outward with shock and consequence. He stood slowly, every movement deliberate, almost as if afraid that if he moved too fast, she'd vanish. "Wait, what?" His voice cracked. "You're pregnant?" She nodded once, her hand resting gently over her stomach. "Yours." Cairo's knees nearly gave, but he reached for the edge of the desk, holding himself upright as if the ground had just been ripped out from under him. "Nyla, why didn't you tell me?" Her eyes shimmered, but her stance never wavered. "Why didn't you stay?" she asked, and the question wasn't just about that morning. It was about everything. About absence, about silence, about how one night of depth had been followed by weeks of being discarded like she never mattered. He took a hesitant step toward her, his eyes glued to her hand, hovering just over her stomach. "May I?" he asked, reaching out but not daring to touch. She stepped back slightly, just enough to make him pause. "You don't get to reach for me now, Cairo. Not when you vanished without a single word. You kissed me like I was the first light you'd seen in years, and then you went dark again." "I was scared," he said, his voice cracking like glass under pressure. "I've spent my life losing people. I didn't want someone the way I wanted you." "So you left before you could feel," she said, almost laughing. "You walked away and then I lost my job, and now you want to act surprised that I'm standing here holding your truth?" He blinked, eyes wide with guilt and something deeper. "Your job?" "Fired," she said, tossing the letter on his desk. "No reason, just gone, right after you disappeared. You think that's a coincidence?" He picked up the letter, his brow furrowing. "I swear, I didn't sign off on this. I didn't know. Someone did this behind my back. I'll fix it." "It's too late," she said, turning toward the door. "I don't want your pity or your power. I came to give you honesty. What you do with it is up to you." "Don't go," he said, stepping forward. "You're carrying my child." She turned back, her eyes full of tears she refused to let fall. "Yes, and whether or not you show up for this child doesn't change the fact that I will." The door closed behind her with a soft finality, but its impact thundered through him. Cairo sank slowly into his chair, his hands shaking as they pressed to his lips. His mind raced, his soul screamed, and all he could see, over and over, was the way she had looked at him, hurt, proud, glowing with strength, and carrying the weight of his choices in her womb. He sat there for a long time, long after the door had closed, long after the light shifted across his desk, alone with the echoes of the woman he let walk away and the truth she left behind, a truth that had just changed his entire life. The office door had closed softly behind her, but the sound of her departure continued to echo in Cairo's chest long after she was gone. Her voice, her truth, her strength, they had pierced through him deeper than any boardroom confrontation, deeper than any loss he'd ever suffered. He stared at the door like a man who'd just watched his last chance walk away, wrapped in a coat and carrying his future inside her womb. But Neela didn't look back. She didn't wait for apologies. She didn't plead. She had come with truth and left with dignity, leaving behind only a letter and the storm she carried in her eyes. For days afterward, she said nothing to anyone. She retreated inward, focusing on the quiet movements of her baby growing inside her, the new rhythm of her days spent jobless but determined, unemployed but unbroken. Her hands began to seek creative spaces again, doodling meal ideas, scribbling names for her child, breathing life into recipes from childhood. She walked by Velvet's often, the restaurant where she had once poured wine and collected tips, now a building that whispered memories each time she passed. But she never stepped inside again. That chapter, she believed, had ended, or so she thought, until the letter arrived. It came one bright morning, wrapped in an envelope so elegant it looked like it had been plucked from another century. Cream-colored, thick paper, sealed with golden wax, stamped with an old family crest. At first, she thought it was a mistake. She hadn't received anything but bills and baby brochures in weeks. But her name was there, clearly written in precise ink, Miss Nyla Storm. Inside, tucked with deliberate grace, was a folded parchment, official, formal, legal. Her eyes scanned the opening line. Per the posthumous execution of the will of Leona de Veron. She froze. Cairo's mother. Her heart slammed against her ribs as her fingers clutched the pages tighter. The letter was from Leona's personal attorney, stating that prior to her passing, Leona had made changes to the trust, changes prompted by a conversation she had with her son about a woman who saved him when he was at his most lost. The name Leona wrote down was Nyla's. There it was, in ink and in law. Full ownership transfer of the flagship restaurant, Velvet's. Effective immediately. Her knees weakened beneath her. She sat on the edge of her bed, rereading the fine print. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a gift wrapped in manipulation. It was a legacy passed on from one woman to another. An inheritance of belief. Leona had never spoken to Nyla in person, and yet somehow she had seen her, through Cairo's words, through his eyes, through something pure enough that it had carved a space in the heart of a mother gone too soon. Nyla's chest heaved with emotion. A waitress yesterday, an owner today. Her eyes filled with tears, not from the weight of wealth, but from the weight of meaning. Someone had believed in her. Someone had seen beyond her apron and trays. She pressed a trembling hand to her belly. "This changes everything," she whispered. That afternoon she walked to Velvet's, not as a returning employee, but as a woman who now held the keys. The staff turned when she stepped inside, her heels clicking softly on the polished floors. Conversations halted, plates froze mid-air, and every familiar face stared in disbelief. Nyla wore a calm grace, her hair swept back, her scarf tied elegantly like a ribbon of rebirth. She stepped behind the hostess stand, then into the kitchen, then into the office where her name was already engraved on the brass plate. No fanfare, No announcements, just her presence, quiet and commanding. When she returned to the floor, the head chef approached her, apron stained, eyebrows raised. "Miss Storm," he said, voice unsure, "you own this now?" She nodded. "Yes." A beat of silence passed before she added, "But I'm not here to rule. I'm here to rebuild." And rebuild she did. Over the following weeks, Nyla transformed the restaurant from polished perfection to soulful elegance. She changed the lighting, added warm textures, invited local artists to display their work, infused the menu with flavors from her childhood, and treated every staff member like a partner, not a subordinate. Slowly, the air in Velvet's changed. It smelled not just of saffron and grilled peach, but of purpose, of joy, of love born from labor. Customers began noticing. Reviews spoke of a shift, a place with heart now, not just money. Every corner bore her touch. Every table was a canvas of compassion. She smiled more now, even through her exhaustion. Her hand often rested on her belly as she gave instructions, as if her child already shared in her triumphs. And yet, through it all, one shadow lingered at the edge of her days. Cairo. He hadn't contacted her again, not even after the ownership transfer. Not even after her name was etched in gold beneath the Velvet sign. But he watched. From across the street sometimes, tucked inside tinted black cars, from the rooftop of the opposite building, from newspaper articles and online reviews. Pride warred with regret in his chest. He saw what she'd become, what she always was, and it broke something open in him to realize she had bloomed without him. That the woman who once stood behind the register now stood behind a legacy, with their child inside her, and the empire he inherited now breathing with her soul. He had given her the restaurant because it was all he could give without demanding space in her world. But deep down, he wondered if he had already lost her. Nyla, however, didn't let thoughts of him cloud her steps. She moved forward. She led with light. But in the quietest moments, when the restaurant had closed and the lights were dimmed, she would stand by the window, palm over her belly, and whisper to the stars, "He's watching. I know he is." And a part of her, stubborn, fragile, honest, still hoped that one day he would step out of the shadows and back into the warmth he once called home. The night air carried a warm breeze as Nyla stood alone inside Velvet's, her hand resting gently on the curve of her belly, eyes tracing the city skyline through the glass window that once reflected only her dreams, but now held the shape of her destiny. The restaurant was closed, the lights dimmed low, the scent of baked lemon thyme and slow-roasted lamb lingering in the corners of the room like memories left behind. Staff had gone home, dishes had been washed, tables stood empty yet proud, each one a page in the story she had authored with grit, grace, and quiet fire. Her baby kicked softly beneath her palm, as if in gentle applause for another day well lived, and she smiled to herself, tired but satisfied. She turned off the final switch, letting the chandelier overhead glow low like a star refusing to burn out, and she walked toward the main entrance, ready to lock the doors. But something stopped her. A shadow, a presence, a stillness so familiar her breath caught before she even turned to look. There, in the farthest booth near the arched window, that booth, sat Cairo. He wasn't dressed in a suit this time, no pressed collar or designer cufflinks. He wore a soft gray sweater, sleeves rolled to his elbows, dark jeans, and a look on his face that said he'd been waiting for this moment for far longer than she had known. His eyes met hers across the dim room, and Nyla froze. He didn't speak. Not yet. He just sat with his hands folded on the table, the same table where once, weeks ago, he had given her a note and a look that rewired her stars. Now his expression was raw, unguarded, aged not by time but by regret and longing. Slowly, cautiously, she walked toward him, the click of her heels muffled by the velvet carpet beneath her. She stopped at the edge of the booth. Her voice was calm, layered with strength and pain. "We're closed," she said. He offered a half-smile, one filled with sadness. "I know. So why are you here?" Her arms crossed over her chest. His eyes fell to her belly for a moment, full, round, beautiful, then lifted back to hers. "Because I couldn't keep watching from the shadows," he said, voice low. "You turned this place into something extraordinary. You turned me into something I never thought I could be." She said nothing, only watched him, studying the lines on his face, the creases that hadn't been there before, the way his hands now trembled slightly where they rested. "You changed everything," he whispered, and the way he said it made her heart twist. "But I changed nothing. I ran. I failed you. I failed our child." She slowly slid into the seat across from him, each movement careful, calculated. Her arms remained crossed, her eyes cool but not cruel. "And now you want—" "What exactly?" He leaned forward, elbows resting on the table, his voice shaking. "To start again. To show up. To be a father. A partner. A man you don't have to carry. Yours, if you'll let me." The silence that followed was thick, not with anger, but with the weight of everything unspoken. Her heart thundered inside her chest, wild and erratic, like it couldn't decide if it should open or run. She stared at him, trying to reconcile the man before her with the one who had vanished, the one who had kissed her like forever, and then disappeared like fog in morning sun. "Why now?" she asked. "Why not 4 weeks ago?" "Because I was a coward," he admitted. "Because I was scared I didn't deserve you. And because the idea of you raising our child without me made me sick with shame." Her lip trembled slightly. She masked it with a slow inhale. "You left a void," she said quietly. "A big one. And I filled it. With work. With courage. With this child's heartbeat. I did it alone. I bled alone. I breathed alone. And now you come back with words." "No," he said. "Not just words." He pulled something from his pocket, a folded sheet of paper, slightly crumpled, edges worn like it had been held too many times. He slid it across the table. "A letter from my mother," he said. Nyla stared at it for a long moment, then slowly picked it up and unfolded it. Leona's handwriting danced across the page, soft and strong. The letter spoke of how Cairo had changed after that night, how he had spoken of a woman who made him laugh again, who made him dream, who smelled like home, how Leona had seen the light come back into her son's eyes for the first time in years, how she had quietly altered her will to make sure that woman, Nyla, was given a place in his world, not because she was owed, but because she had earned it with love, not ambition. Nyla's fingers trembled as she read it, tears prickling her lashes. She looked up at him. "You showed this to me." "Why?" "Because I want you to know," he said, voice breaking, "that I didn't give you that restaurant out of guilt or pity. My mother saw you before I did. I just caught up." She closed her eyes for a long breath, trying to still the quake in her chest. Her arms slowly lowered, hands resting on her belly. Protective, powerful. "I don't know if I can trust you again," she whispered. "Then let me earn it," he replied. "Let me stand beside you, not in front, not behind, beside, as the man you always deserved, as the father our child will look up to, not perfect, but real." Her tears slipped, soft and silent. She didn't wipe them, didn't hide. "You hurt me," she said. "I know," he whispered, "and I'd spend every day proving I can heal what I broke." Another long pause. The room held its breath. Outside, the city lights flickered. Inside, her walls, those quiet, hard-built walls, began to tremble. And in the depth of that stillness, she remembered that rainy night. The way he had tucked her hair behind her ear. The way he had said, "You're a storm, too." the way he had whispered in sleep, "You smell like home." And now, sitting here across from her, with eyes full of something too tender to fake, he looked like a man who had finally come home himself. Her lips parted, the smallest breath of forgiveness forming between them. Not in words, not in promises, but in possibility. The city was unusually quiet that evening, as though the universe itself had exhaled, softening the rush of traffic and the clamor of horns, to give space for something delicate to unfold. Neela sat on the edge of her bed, fingers brushing gently over her belly, her mind still swirling with the echo of Cairo's voice, his eyes brimming with truth, and the letter from Leona folded carefully in her drawer like a whisper from the past. The world outside her apartment hummed with life, but within her something quieter took root, a tremor of hope, cautious but alive. She lit a candle by the window, its flame flickering like the emotions dancing in her chest. Evening had settled, warm and golden, and just as the last strands of sunlight melted into dusk, a knock came, not rushed, not pounding, just a single uncertain rhythm that stilled her breath. She rose slowly, unsure if she was imagining it, her heartbeat quickening with each step toward the door. When she opened it, the hallway light revealed him, Cairo. Not the businessman, not the icon, just the man. He stood there, no driver behind him, no polished facade, just a quiet presence in a black sweater, holding a bouquet of soft lilacs and wild jasmine, the very scent of her skin from that night long ago. His hands trembled slightly, not from cold but from the gravity of standing in front of the woman who had taught him how to feel again. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he knelt, not with grandiosity, not in performance, but with sincerity in his eyes and the weight of 1,000 unsaid things pressing against his spine. "I love you," he said, voice low, reverent, "and I never stopped." His gaze was steady, locked with hers, not seeking forgiveness, but offering the raw truth of his heart. Nyla's fingers gripped the edge of the door, breath catching as she looked down at him. This man who once vanished and now stood like a prayer returned. Her hand reached out instinctively, brushing against his cheek, feeling the scruff of new growth and the heat of vulnerability beneath his skin. "I want to love this child," he whispered. "And I want to love you, not in fear, not from afar, but with both feet planted, with my whole soul, for real, this time." Her silence wasn't cold, it was full, full of memories and longing and the ache of every night she wished he would come. And now he had, without a plan, without pride, just him. She stepped back slowly, and without a word she let him in. The door clicked shut behind him, but the air between them remained open, charged with something neither of them could name, but both understood. He stood awkwardly in her living room, holding the bouquet like a boy unsure of what to do with his hands, while she arranged them gently in a vase, placing them beside the candle still burning on the window-sill. They sat on the couch, closer than strangers, but not yet lovers again. Not yet. The silence between them wasn't empty. It pulsed with questions, with breaths, with glances that lingered longer than they should. She spoke first, her voice soft. "What changed?" He leaned back, eyes never leaving hers. "You did," he said, "and then I did. Watching you build something beautiful without me, it showed me what I had been running from wasn't failure. It was love. Real love. The kind that asks you to show up even when you're scared." She exhaled, deeply, her shoulders easing. "You broke something in me," she said, "and then I built something stronger." "I know," he replied, voice nearly a whisper. "And I don't want to take anything from you. I want to give. Every day. For the rest of our lives." She looked at him for a long, long time, and what she saw wasn't perfection. It was presence. It was a man stripped down to truth. Her heart opened in slow degrees, not all at once, but enough to reach for his hand, place it gently on her belly, where their child fluttered like a tiny heartbeat made visible. He closed his eyes at the touch, a single tear slipping down his cheek as he whispered, "Hi, little one." The air thickened, then softened, and the space between them collapsed like walls falling in quiet surrender. He leaned in, not for her lips, but for her belly, pressing a reverent kiss to the curve of her skin, a sacred offering to the life they had created. Then his eyes met hers again, and in them she saw no lies, no hesitation, only home. She kissed him, not like before, not with the hunger of a fire newly lit, but with the weight of a love that had been waiting in silence, growing stronger in the quiet. Their kiss deepened slowly, breath sinking, hands remembering. He carried her to bed with the tenderness of a man who had once lost her and vowed never to let go again. The sheets tangled around them as their bodies relearned each other's language. Not rushed, not desperate, but slow, deep, intimate in ways that had nothing to do with skin and everything to do with soul. He kissed her shoulder, her neck, the crease of her palm, places men never kissed when they only wanted lust. She traced the scar above his collarbone, the one he got when he fell off his bike at 8, the one no one ever noticed, but she had remembered from that first night. They didn't speak much. There were no declarations or demands, only murmurs, touches, sighs. And when their hands finally stilled, and their breathing slowed, and the moonlight spilled across the bed like a blessing, he held her, tight, protective, present. She nestled against him, her ear over his heart, listening to the rhythm that now beat in harmony with her own. Sleep didn't come, not because they resisted it, but because dreaming had already begun. Together, they lay in the hush of midnight, whispering half-formed hopes and baby names, fears and laughter, promises that didn't need loud ceremony to be sacred. She told him how scared she was sometimes, how powerful and powerless pregnancy made her feel. He told her he'd read every book, attend every appointment, paint the nursery himself. She laughed. He swore, and she believed him. The night stretched long and lovely, and when dawn came, threading gold through the blinds, she stirred slightly, her face tucked beneath his chin, her body curved into his like the final piece of a long-lost puzzle. His arms were still around her, steady and warm. And in that moment, before words, before coffee, before reality dared interrupt, she knew. This time he was staying. The sun filtered through the blinds like a lover's sigh, warming the bed where Nyla lay curled against Cairo, her head tucked beneath his chin, her belly cradled in the crook of his arm, as if even in sleep he was guarding the most sacred piece of their shared universe. The morning was soft around them, filled with the scent of vanilla from last night's candle, still flickering faintly on the nightstand, and the music of birds starting their city serenade outside the cracked window. She stirred first, pressing her lips gently to the base of his throat, feeling the thrum of his heartbeat beneath her kiss. His arms tightened around her, murmuring a sleepy, "still here" against her ear, and she smiled, a quiet joy filling her chest. That morning didn't begin with plans or strategy. It began with gratitude, with the quiet miracle of waking up together. By noon, they were in the heart of Velvet's, the place where it all began. Now, not just a restaurant, but a living testament to love, grit, and rebirth. They walked in together, not hand in hand, but energy in energy, a unity so seamless the staff felt it before they even saw them. Neela wore a flowing coral wrap dress that kissed her ankles and highlighted the regal curve of her baby bump, her hair up in a bun wrapped with silk and power. Cairo, beside her, wore simplicity with elegance. Navy shirt, sleeves rolled, watch face down, every inch of him attuned to the rhythm she set. They worked like two parts of the same breath, her voice guiding the team through warmth and vision, his hands sketching floor plans, calculating expansion, coordinating logistics with silent efficiency. But it wasn't the business alone that made people pause when they walked by. It was the way he would glance at her mid-meeting and smile like he'd just rediscovered sunrise. It was the way she would laugh at his spreadsheets and scribble hearts in the margins of his notes. Together they turned Velvet's into more than a destination. It became a revolution. Nyla created Love Thursdays, inviting couples of all kinds to dine under candlelight and share their stories on linen cards that were later displayed like art. She brought in local chefs from forgotten neighborhoods, giving them nights to shine. She invited poets to speak between courses, made sure every wall carried a mural, every plate carried soul. Cairo didn't just allow it, he honored it. He redesigned the dining space to reflect her style, a mix of elegance and heritage, gold accents softened by earthy woods, lighting that bathed the space in romance. He restructured the employee policies, increasing wages, offering health care, implementing paid leave. "If this place is a reflection of you," he said one night as they reviewed budgets under fairy lights, "then everyone who walks in should feel loved." And they did. Customers left not just full, but moved. Newspapers caught on. Interviews followed. Features praised the power couple who turned pain into empire. They were invited to speak at conferences, him about innovation, her about leadership born of empathy. But behind all the accolades, they remained rooted. At home, they shared soup over candlelit dinners, soft music floating between them. Cairo often knelt before her, massaging her swollen ankles with oil warmed between his palms, whispering how breathtaking she looked even when she scolded him for over-ordering lemons. Nyla would read aloud from poetry books before bed, her voice wrapping around the room like silk. She read Neruda when his day had been rough, Maya Angelou when hers had, and every night, as if by sacred ritual, he'd press a kiss to her belly, whispering lullabies he was still making up on the spot, silly, sweet, achingly tender. They argued, of course, sometimes over menu edits or color swatches, sometimes because her hormones raged and he didn't listen the first time. But even their fights had rhythm, like thunder before rain that always softened into laughter. One evening at a charity gala they hosted for struggling artists, Neela walked in wearing a golden silk gown that shimmered with every step, her skin glowing like summer dusk. Cairo paused mid-conversation, absolutely still, breath stolen as he watched her walk across the room. When she reached him, he didn't offer a compliment. Instead, he cupped her face, full of awe, and whispered, "You make power look romantic." Her eyes danced, and she tilted her head. "And you," she said, looping her arm through his, "make love look powerful." The room fell away in that moment, just the two of them, dancing in a place built with their hands, breathing in a life they had once thought impossible. Their story, once whispered among staff as scandal and curiosity, became something greater. It became legend. A waitress who saved a drunk stranger in an alley became the heartbeat of a restaurant empire. A millionaire who once drowned in silence became a man who spoke poetry in spreadsheets and passion in presence. People came from other cities to see them, not just for the food, but for them. For the way he pulled out her chair even when no one watched. For the way she touched his back as she passed behind him. For the way their eyes met across crowded rooms and said, "You matter." Love wasn't a side story in their success. It was the story. Every day they grew deeper. Every day they fell again. He told her once, "You didn't just make me feel. I now understand the difference between having power and being powerful." She kissed his chest over the heart that once hurt alone and whispered, "And I finally know what it means to be seen." They weren't perfect, but they were real. And in a world that often forgot to cherish that, they were proof that business didn't have to harden you, that love didn't have to weaken you, and that two people, flawed, fiery, beautiful, could create a world where legacy and intimacy walked hand in hand. As her due date approached, they slowed their evenings, watching sunsets from their balcony, the city's lights below echoing the quiet brightness between them. They didn't speak of fear. They spoke of names, of lullabies, of painting a mural in the nursery with the words, "Born of fire, raised in love." And in every glance exchanged between meetings, every shared smile across the kitchen, every touch behind closed doors, the world saw it. Not just a business, not just a couple, but soulmates who had found not only each other, but themselves. The summer air was thick with the perfume of orange blossoms and promise when the first twinge struck her. Not a sharp pain, but a deep, pulsing rhythm low in her body, like the first note of a symphony preparing to swell. Neela paused on the rooftop, one hand cradling her belly as the sun bled golden across the sky, her dress rippling against her ankles, and her other hand in Cairo's. He looked at her, saw the change in her eyes, the slight tremble in her exhale, and he knew. He didn't panic. He wrapped his arm around her, guided her gently inside, his voice low and steady as he called the car, the doctor, the plan they'd memorized like a sacred dance. The city seemed to hold its breath as they drove, streetlights flickering like stars bowing in reverence to the moment unfolding inside that black car. Cairo never looked away from her face, brushing damp strands of hair from her brow, kissing her fingers each time the pain clenched her spine. At the hospital, the staff moved quickly, respectfully, whispering her name like she was royalty. Not because she owned velvets, but because she had become something of a myth. The woman who changed a man. The woman who turned a restaurant into a temple of love. The woman now breathing through the hardest pain with fire in her eyes. Nyla gripped Cairo's hand like it anchored her to the earth, her jaw clenched as wave after wave of labor rocked her, but never once did she scream in fear. She roared with purpose, sweat coating her skin, her back arching, her breath wild and full of life. Cairo didn't leave her side for a single second. He knelt beside her, whispering affirmations, pressing his lips to her temple, murmuring through clenched teeth, "You're the strongest woman I've ever known." And in that room filled with sterile lights and sacred groans, time stilled and then exploded in sound, a cry, small, fierce, eternal. Their daughter arrived like lightning and lavender, her skin the rich glow of her mother's, her eyes dark with the depth of oceans already lived. The doctor held her up, then gently placed her on Nyla's chest, and the moment her tiny fingers curled instinctively around Nyla's necklace, the one she'd worn since that night in the alley, the tears came, hot, silent, unstoppable. Cairo stared, his breath caught, his heart broken open in the most beautiful way. He reached down, touched the baby's back with trembling fingers, then took her into his arms like she was made of porcelain and stars. She fit perfectly there, and he didn't speak at first. He just looked. And then, voice cracking, he whispered, "Hi, Amari. I'm your dad." The name had come to them one night while lying under the stars. Amari, meaning strength and grace. Grace, the gift she'd been. Amari Grace de Veron. Nyla reached for both of them, her hand brushing her daughter's foot, her husband's wrist, and in that moment, a family was born. Not built. Born. Through sweat, tears, history, love. The hospital room dimmed around them, but they glowed. Nyla in the bed, exhausted yet radiating something divine. Cairo sitting at the edge of the mattress, holding their daughter with reverence, as if holding the proof that love was more powerful than failure, than fear, than everything he once believed about himself. Outside, the entire staff of Velvets waited in the hospital garden, phones silenced, candles lit, a quiet vigil of family chosen not by blood but by story. When Cairo stepped out briefly to announce her birth, his voice cracked as he said, "She's perfect." Cheers erupted, champagne corks popped, strangers wept. Inside, Nyla held Amari to her breast, the rhythm of her heartbeat becoming the lullaby that guided her newborn into sleep. Back home, they turned the rooftop, once a dining haven, once a garden, into a nursery that looked like heaven met earth. White fabric canopies swayed in the breeze. Wildflowers bloomed in every corner. Lanterns flickered with fairy lights. The crib was hand-carved by a local artist Nyla once tipped enough to pay rent. Every detail was curated with love, with history, with soul. They didn't hire nannies or distance themselves from the sleepless nights. They embraced them. Cairo changed diapers with the precision of a man managing billion-dollar deals, humming soft jazz to soothe Amari's cries. Neela breastfed beneath the moonlight, her fingers running through Amari's curls while reading love stories aloud. And each time Cairo watched them, his wife nursing, his daughter blinking sleepily, something inside him softened further, like winter surrendering to spring. He often sat at the edge of the bed, sketching plans for the next Velvet's location, with Amari curled on his chest, her tiny fingers gripping his collar, as if she too was claiming him, reminding him he belonged here, in this moment, as deeply as he once belonged to spreadsheets and silence. They took long walks in the park, Nyla wearing Amari against her chest in a sling, Cairo carrying picnic baskets and cameras. They weren't trying to prove anything. They were simply existing, fully, finally, together. The city watched them, not with envy, but admiration. Their love was no longer just a fairy tale whispered through dinner crowds. It was living, breathing, growing. Cairo often told reporters, "She taught me how to be a man. My daughter taught me how to be gentle." And Neela, radiant in interviews, always ended with, "Love isn't what saved us. It's what made us." They wrote a book together, part memoir, part recipe collection, Velvet, The Taste of Grace. It soared to bestseller lists, not because of marketing, but because their truth was delicious. They donated a portion of proceeds to single mothers, underfunded chefs, youth writers. Because they remembered. They remembered struggle, silence, shadows. And now they danced in the light. Amari grew in a home drenched with affection. Every milestone, her first smile, first laugh, first step, was celebrated not with grandeur, but with quiet awe. She giggled every time her father twirled her around the nursery, every time her mother sang lullabies off-key, every time they told her the story of how she came from kindness, from rain, from a night where love whispered, "Begin." And as she slept in the crib surrounded by Jasmine, Nyla and Cairo often stood beside her, arms around each other, hearts full, eyes wet with the weight of joy. Because they knew. She wasn't just their baby. She was the embodiment of every risk they took, every wound they healed, every kiss they shared. Amari Grace was the birth of everything. The night air shimmered with golden lights strung like stars from the rooftop rafters as Nyla adjusted the white satin ribbon tied delicately around Amari's curls, her fingers steady despite the thunderstorm of memories in her chest. It had been a year, 12 moons of sleepless nights and sunrise lullabies, of business expansions and belly laughter, of tears, growth, and a love that had not only survived, but bloomed into something transcendent. Downstairs, Velvet's flagship was buzzing with energy for its grand reopening, but this time it wasn't about cuisine or branding, it was about legacy. And tonight's theme, whispered on the lips of every guest, etched on every menu card, projected in golden cursive against the walls, was From Waitress to Wonder. Nyla took one last glance in the mirror. Her white and gold gown shimmered like fire kissed by moonlight, hugging her body in all the right places, the skirt flowing like poetry with every step. Amari babbled in her arms, tiny hands grasping the string of pearls around her mother's neck, and Cairo stood behind them, tuxedo crisp, eyes molten with love. "Ready?" he whispered. Nyla smiled softly, more than ever. As they descended the staircase together, her with regal poise, him with pride carved into every line of his face, and Amari cooing like a melody, every head in the room turned, cameras flashed, applause erupted. But more than that, the air shifted. Guests gasped, not from surprise but reverence. There was no doubt now that this woman, once balancing trays and tucking bills into aprons, had become the very heartbeat of a movement, a symbol of transformation, resilience, and the way love, when nurtured, could become a kingdom. Reporters clustered near them, microphones extended. "Nyla," one asked, "what's the secret to all of this?" She looked around, the chandeliers, the smiling staff, the mural of her and Amari in the entrance, the soft glow of joy in Cairo's gaze, and answered with quiet certainty, "I didn't just fall in love with a man. I fell in love with the life we built together." Cairo's eyes gleamed, and without warning he leaned in and kissed her right there on camera. Not a performance, not a pose, but the kind of kiss that tasted like home, like every promise he ever made her in silence and every vow he had yet to speak. The crowd swooned and Amari clapped, mimicking the applause around her. As the night deepened and laughter danced between champagne toasts and orchestral melodies, Cairo stepped away briefly, excusing himself under the pretense of handling something with the event manager. Nyla didn't question it. She was too busy floating through conversations, guests, and memories layered like petals. But then someone called her name gently. "Ms. de Veron, could you step onto the rooftop for a moment?" Her brows furrowed, but she complied. Amari now curled asleep in her friend's arms. She made her way through the private spiral staircase and pushed open the rooftop door, only to gasp. The space had transformed. It wasn't the same rooftop garden where she once served candlelit dinners, or even the nursery they had designed for Amari's first year. Tonight it was a celestial dream. Lanterns floated in shallow, reflecting pools, roses bloomed in spirals around a white arch, and in the center stood Cairo, hands behind his back, eyes lit with a nervous excitement that made him look like the man she met behind the restaurant, unguarded, human, real. "Cairo," she breathed, her hand rising to her heart. He stepped forward slowly, his voice low, reverent. "You brought me home the night I didn't even know I was lost. You gave me peace when I didn't know I was at war. You gave me love, not loud, not flashy, but steady, kind, eternal." He knelt on one knee, pulling from his jacket a ring that shimmered like liquid moonlight, a teardrop diamond set between two rose-gold wings. "Marry me. This time for real. For always. For everything we've been, everything we are, and everything we'll still become." Tears slid down her cheeks before she even realized she was crying. Her hands covered her mouth, her knees weak beneath the weight of joy, too, immense to contain. She nodded first, frantic, breathless, and then managed the word, "yes," though it came out more like a sob. He stood, slipping the ring onto her trembling finger, and pulled her into his arms as fireworks erupted across the sky, golden, pink, silver showers painting the heavens like they were meant to bless this exact moment. Down below, the entire restaurant staff came rushing to the rooftop, cheers echoing into the city night, champagne bubbling, and Amari awakened to find herself in a world where fairy tales didn't just exist. They were built, brick by brick, by the very people who once thought they didn't deserve them. Cairo held Neela tightly, whispering into her ear, "You weren't just a waitress. You're the queen of my heart, my home, and everything I'll ever own." She leaned back, cupping his face, her voice steady through her tears. "And you weren't just a millionaire. You became the man who built an empire around love." They stood together, surrounded by celebration, yet in their own stillness, a moment suspended in eternity, where past, present, and future collided into one glorious truth. They were no longer stories of survival or even success. They were the story of transformation, of a woman who carried warmth in her hands and vision in her soul, of a man who gave up solitude for something infinitely greater, and of a child born from a night that was never supposed to mean anything, but became the beginning of everything. As the final firework burst above them, casting their joined shadows across the rooftop, Nyla looked out over the city that once ignored her, now rising on her legacy. Cairo kissed her temple again, and she whispered, "Let's keep building." He smiled. "Only if we build it all in your name." And with that, the curtain closed, not on a fairy tale, but on a new kind of royalty. One forged not in wealth, but in wonder. One ruled not by power, but by love. And at the center of it all, in white and gold, stood the queen of his empire, his wife, his home, his forever.